today's video, I have for you 4 Dollar Tree DIY and trash to treasure projects for the patriotic holidays. Here we go.
The first thing I wanted to do for this project was to spray paint a few items because I have been running low on craft paint. So I decided to use spray paint. First, I wanted to use these pieces of garden fence that I picked up off the trash last summer to make a flag. So here I am spray painting some of the slats red, and then I spray painted some of the slats white. I was going to throw this out because of this chip here, and then I was like, what am I doing? I'm a YouTuber, I do DIYs. I can remake this into something. So I decided to give this little dish a coat of spray paint as well. For all the projects that I'm showing you, I spray painted them with the Rust-Oleum 2X paint and primer in one. This is the spray paint that I always use because you get great coverage with it, and I usually get it in satin so my projects are wipeable, but if you want a chalk paint look, you can get it in flat and it works great. Then I had these 2 canning jars I wanted to also make into decor. I hammered a paint stick into the ground and then just kind of hung my little canning jar on top of it. I did do multiple coats on the jars. Today's video is part of the DIY challenge theme Red, White, and Blue hosted by Heidi Sonbold DIY. She hosts a DIY challenge every month. She's a very talented DIYer. If you haven't seen her stuff, you should definitely go check her out. I will link her in my description box below. For several of the projects in this video, I'm going to be using napkins from these 2 packs of napkins that I got at the Dollar Tree. I got red gingham and flag napkins. And then I also needed decoupage. I was looking for Mod Podge, but here in the Twin Cities, it was hard to come by. So I decided to go ahead and try making my own. I've never done this, but I've seen recipes on the internet, and basically the ratio they say is 2 to 1. So 2 parts of glue to 1 part water. This glue seemed a little thin to me, so I decided to use a little less water, and I figured, well, if it's not enough water, I can always add more, but you can't really take the water out once you do it. So I got these 2 bottles of clear glue from the Dollar Tree and emptied them into this large canning jar. And then to make sure the ratios were right, I took one of the empty bottles of glue and filled it with water. So I should have put an entire bottle of water in there, but I only wound up using about half. And that actually really wound up to be a good recipe. Then I closed up my jar and gave it a really good shake. This Mod Podge wound up working so well that I may not go back. I might just make my own from now on because it's cheaper. You get a lot more for your money. So I don't know, maybe I'll just keep using this in the future. And then for my first project, I got the ball jars. They were all dry now, and I cut up my piece of flag napkin. So I basically cut the napkin and then opened it up, and it made this nice stretched out piece of flag that went from stripes to stars, from stripes to stars. And whenever you're doing decoupage, there's tons of techniques to use. Because I was doing mine on these bumpy, weird objects, I didn't use the best technique. There are techniques to get the napkins like extremely flat, and I'll show that in another video. But that's not what I was going for today. I kind of wanted the rustic look, and I knew it was going to be hard to get them flat anyway because there was surfaces underneath where I was putting them. So I wasn't too worried about that. So I got my piece of napkin. You always have to make sure that you separate the underlayer from the piece that you're going to be decoupaging on. And I just used a little bit of my Mod Podge and this little brush, which wound up working really well. And I carefully applied it kind of a little bit at a time onto the jar. And the main tip I have for you if you decide to use this project is to make sure your dry fingers don't get stuck to the napkin. It did happen to me once or twice. As long as there's Mod Podge between your finger and the napkin, it's fine because that prevents your finger from sticking and then ripping the napkin. But once your finger starts to dry a little, get it off the napkin and put more decoupage. Or you can use a little teeny bit of water, that also works. But just keep your fingers moist either with the decoupage or with a tiny bit of water, just to keep yourself from ripping the napkin. Now, I was not going for perfect because I like my decor to be rustic and farmhouse looking. So when I got to the back of the project, I just wanted it to look neat. I didn't need them to line up perfectly. I decided how I wanted it to be, whether I want the stripes or the stars on top, and that's just a personal preference. I think I went with the stars on top, yeah. And so then I just kind of trimmed the napkin and decoupaged the ends to make sure that they were really well stuck. Once my napkin was all applied, I did just take my brush to make sure to go back and make sure the edges had all gotten a little bit of Mod Podge on them. And then once this is all dried, I will do a final coat of Mod Podge on it, but you don't want to do that for at least 15 minutes. And I waited a little bit longer because I knew I wanted to sand some of the napkin off to show the word ball through it. So this is what it looked like after step one. Here's the larger one, which I also did. So I let them dry for a while, and then I came back and here's what they looked like all dried. I'm just showing you the word ball. And so what I did, I just took a little piece of 220 grit sandpaper. I just tear off little pieces from a big sheet. And I lightly, very lightly sanded over the word ball so that it would show through the napkin. And then I just scuffed up the napkin in lots of different places because, again, I didn't want this to look too like new. I wanted to give it that rustic, worn out look. So I scuffed the napkin and the paint in several places. I made sure to scuff up the paint on the jars anywhere where there were raised letters or designs just because I like that look. Then I took my microfiber cloth and I just wiped off the dust from sanding off of both jars and gave them each a final thin coat of the Mod Podge. And you just want to make sure that you don't have any drips or big blobs. And when the jars were dried, I went ahead and styled them. So you can use them for lots of different purposes. I knew I wanted to put flowers in one of them, but I had also found these cute blue and white straws at the Dollar Tree. So I thought this would look great on a 4th of July table if you had these cutie little straws in one of them and then flowers in the other. And just a little tip, these are Dollar Tree florals, but the key to making Dollar Tree florals look good is to use your wire clippers and separate the flowers and actually arrange them the way you would with fresh flowers, and then they look a lot less like Dollar Tree florals. And for the dish, I used the same technique. Here's what it looked like dry. And I took another strip of that napkin and separated it from the back and then used my brush to apply it in the same way. For this one, I just started in the center and I put that center strip of napkin there in the center. And again, if you're careful, you can lift it up and reposition. Now you can see I was struggling a little bit here, but again, if you keep your fingers wet or moist with the decoupage, with the Mod Podge, it's fine. So you just have to, again, work slowly and get it to be where you want it to be. And this was just a personal design choice. I wanted the napkin to wrap over to the back, so I just lifted it up and did the same thing on the back, which made it a little tricky for drying, but I wound up setting it on a spool of ribbon, which kept then the bottom of the dish off of the little place where I had it drying so that the napkin wouldn't wind up sticking to my table instead of to the project. And here's what it looked like the next day. And I didn't put its final coat of Mod Podge on yet because I wanted to put letters on. Now, I don't have a Cricut. That's not to say I won't ever get a Cricut, but right now I don't have one. So I pulled out some old scrapbooking letters. Again, I'm not using this for food. I'm just using it for decor. And I wanted it to say stars and stripes. And that was kind of my plan from the beginning because it was like a divided dish. I just thought that would be cute. So I used my little scrapbooking letters to spell out the words stars and stripes. I got these a long time ago from Michael's, but I'm sure there's still things like this out there. And then I gave it a top coat of the Mod Podge and let it dry. And here's what it looks like finished. I put it in this mini plate holder that I found in the trash a few weeks back. And I think it looks great with the ball jars. This would be absolutely adorable. Another addition to a July 4th table or in your patriotic decor for the season. And if you'd like to see how I style a lot of my DIYs and thrifted treasures in my home, as well as cleaning and gardening content, I recently started another channel called Nicole Northgarden Home and Garden. If that's your kind of thing, I would love to have you join me over there on that channel. I will link it in the cards above as well as in the description box below. For this next project, I wanted to make a little patriotic sign to go on my tiered tray that I will be decorating for the patriotic holidays. So I pulled this sign out of my stash. It's from the Dollar Tree. I think I got it last year. I removed that centerpiece and set it aside and gave it several coats of chalk paint. I actually should have spray painted this as well. I think it would have gone a lot faster. I don't know why I decided to use the chalk paint, but I did. Anyway. But it was okay because this didn't need to be perfect because I was going to just be applying a napkin over it. This is just so that the blue doesn't show through the napkin. And I took one of the red gingham napkins, so just kind of measuring in a very rough way. I could have gotten a ruler, but I didn't. This worked fine. So then I got my scissor and I just cut the square where I had kind of measured it. Then again, I just separated the plies of the napkin, always taking off the back ply from the picture ply. And then I went ahead and took my Mod Podge and just applied a thin coat to the little white box. And then very carefully, I set my napkin on top of it. Again, this is not like proper Mod Podging technique, but I had to do it this way because it was putting it in something. It just made it a lot harder to do the better techniques. But the key here is to always be working with wet Mod Podge. You just don't want to let it get dry on you because then that's when your fingers start to stick. And here I'm just taking a clear Ziploc bag. You can also use plastic wrap, and I'm just putting it over top of it so that I can really smooth out the wrinkles. But again, don't let the bag get dry and stuck to the Mod Podge because you will rip your napkin. So just make sure you're working quickly but carefully to smooth out all of the wrinkles. And this is what it looked like done. And then you want to let that dry for about 15 minutes before you put a top coat. Then I painted these 3 little stars from my stash with a little bit of that same white chalk paint. And off camera, I painted the little square from the center with some navy blue spray paint. Again, because at this point, I still didn't have a lot of paint. I did wind up going out to get more paint before I finished up my flag project. But at this point, I just had the navy blue spray paint, so I gave it 2 coats of that. And I gave my little box a final coat of Mod Podge over top of the gingham napkin. And then I let it dry. Again, that was also off camera. Then I took my hot glue and I attached the little stars to the little blue square. And I just kind of wanted them to be randomly placed. I don't like things to be too symmetrical. And then I got some jute twine from my stash and I just wrapped it around the little blue centerpiece several times. And then I made sure I was leaving enough of the twine so that I could tie a little bow. So I cut it and tied it. Then I glued it to the center, and then I did glue the little bow down just so that it would stay in place and look nice on my tray. And this is what the final product looked like. I thought it was just adorable. I just gave the little ends a snip so they were short enough. That is going to look great on my tiered tray. For my last project, I wanted to make my garden fence flag. So I laid all the pieces down. This is the back side of all of the pieces. That's what I was going to be gluing to. And I was just kind of lining them up to make them look the way that I wanted them to. Then I took these 2 paint stirrers, which I had also painted, and they're just stir sticks from Ace Hardware. We've been painting the outside of our house, so we actually have a ton of these laying around. And I did trim them with a scissor to make them the correct length. And then I just put a ton of hot glue on the backs of them and glued them to the backs of the fence pieces. And that was all that it took to get this to be a sturdy piece. Then I needed to paint the field of blue on my flag. And again, this does not have the correct number of stripes. This is just a representative flag. I wasn't trying to recreate an actual American flag. So I did tape off a field of blue using my painter's tape and my little square. And I just wanted, the angles to be correct. So then I just tried to push it down, stick it down really well so I wouldn't have too much feathering at the edge. I did still wind up getting a little bit of the blue paint to bleed underneath the tape. There are techniques for that. I should have painted right along the edge with white and red paint, and then that seals it off, and then I could have painted blue and had a really crisp edge. But because I had used spray paint and I didn't have the right color paint, I didn't do that. But that's fine. It wound up working out just fine. I don't have footage of it, but when I pulled the blue tape off, I did use a little piece of sandpaper to just sand off some of the feathering, and then that took care of it for the most part. And at this point, I had gone to Walmart to restock my paint cabinet because I was out of so many different colors. And so I'm using evening navy. It did wind up looking a little bit purple to me, but that's okay. I had to do multiple coats to cover over the red especially, but I did wind up getting it to look really nice. While the blue paint was drying, I took this Dollar Tree sign and a little putty knife and I popped off these metal stars. I actually used stars from 2 different signs. I wanted to have like 5 or 6 stars to put in my field of blue. So I just popped them off. And then I got some of this dark brown paint and a little bit of a lighter brown paint. And I put a little bit on my tray with a sponge brush and dabbed off most of the paint. And then I just sponged a little bit of paint onto all of the edges of the stars. I really wanted them to look like slightly rusted galvanized metal. Once they were painted and dried, then I gave each of them a little coat of the Mod Podge just to make sure that the paint wasn't going to scrape off. And then I glued them to the flag using hot glue. Didn't require much glue to attach them, and the glue adhered to the wood really well. And then for the final step, I needed a way to hang it, so I used these little screw-in eyes that I have in a hanging kit that I bought at Ace Hardware. I've had them for a while. I use them on a lot of projects, but they just basically screw into wood really easily. You don't even need a pilot hole. And I put 2 of them in, and then I used twine to create the hanger. I double looped my twine just because I liked that look, but you could definitely do it however you want. Here's what the finished product looked like. I really love how this one turned out. And that's all that I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed all of these DIYs that I created using trash to treasure items and Dollar Tree products. And until my next video, thanks for watching.